Hi, my name is Mallory Jenner Robinson. Join me on A Hateful Homicide, a true crime and investigative journalism podcast dedicated to telling the stories regarding the murders of our transgender, gender non-binary, intersex, and two-spirit community members in the United States and abroad. This is A Hateful Homicide.
What's your emergency?
An arrest in the death of a transgender woman.
When we talk about the LGBT community's marginalization, trans women of color specifically experience the most violence.
These cases are true. The victims are real, and their voices matter. This is A Hateful Homicide. The murder of Julie Doe. Introducing the Trans Doe Network. Sunday, September 25th, 1988, Clermont, Florida. Warning, the following content may contain evidence of misgendering. Discretion is advised.
It's a cold case 35 years old. A body found on the side of the road in rural Lake County.
To this day, detectives still haven't figured out the identity, but as West 2's Haley Krubelholm explains, technology recently uncovered a twist in this mystery.
Awfully hard to solve a murder if we don't know who the victim is.
In September of 1988, a man looking for cypress wood in rural Clermont, practically to the Polk County line, found a body.
This female had been dragged from the road about 30 feet into the bushes. Indicates, some sort of concealment, which usually is indicative of a homicide of some type.
Detective Daniel Conley with the Lake County Sheriff's Office came out of retirement to join their cold case unit in 2019. He hadn't joined the department by 1988, but he says back then, detectives talked to people in the area and tried to match the body to missing persons reports. They got nothing.
Nothing seemed to pan out, and the case went cold after a while.
With no name, they decided to call her Julie Doe. She was anywhere from 24 to 33. She had strawberry blonde hair with brown roots, well-manicured nails, and signs of a nose job and breast implants. She was wearing an acid-wash jean skirt and a blue and green tank top. They believe the body could have been there a few days or weeks. To put together a sketch of what she might have looked like, they turned to a detective with the Orange County Sheriff's Office.
I did sketches for Chicago PD, Honolulu PD, New York.
Detective Stephen Fusco is retired now, but in his career, he did thousands of sketches.
As a forensic artist, we're looking for, clues.
Looking at the person's clothing and things found at the scene, he would work to put together what that person might have looked like when they were alive. Fusco's sketch was released, but no one came forward to identify her. A lab studied the remains and submitted her DNA to National Missing and Unidentified Persons Database. According to a timeline from the Sheriff's Office, progress on the case pretty much came to a halt in 1989, but picked up again in 2010, when new DNA samples were submitted to a university in Texas. And 5 years later, the medical examiner's office received a new report from a lab at a Florida university. The results were completely unexpected.
Julie Doe was actually born as a male based on the chromosomes.
And Conley says an isotope analysis revealed Julie Doe likely spent most of her life in the Kissimmee River area, probably Polk County down to Monroe County. Over the years, they've entered her DNA and dental records to more databases with no hits. So now they've turned to the DNA Doe Project,
which is a nonprofit that helps investigators conduct studies, mainly genealogical studies.
Using Julie Doe's DNA and comparing it to DNA submitted by other people, they work to find people related to her, however distant, crafting a family tree. Right now, Conley says they have thousands and thousands of potential family hits to sift through.
Not all of them are going to pan out, and of course, there has to be branches of a family trees, and they're constructing that as we speak.
He says if they can figure out who she is, they're a whole lot closer to finding out how she died, if she was killed, and who could be responsible.
Hopefully it won't be long. Our fingers are crossed.
In Lake County, Haley Crumpelholm, WESH 2 News.
Wow, and if you know anything about Julie Doe, you're asked to contact the Lake County Sheriff's Office or Crime Line at 1-800-423-TIPS.
It's Sunday, September 25th, 1988, in the city of Clermont, Florida. It would be the home where the remains of 27-year-old white transgender female Julie Doe would be discovered. And when Julie was discovered to be a transgender female in 2015, after DNA analysis confirmed that Julie's chromosomes were XY, that of someone assigned male at birth, what would this mean for all DNA evidence going forward for our community members who are missing and unidentifiable? Welcome, my audience, to Season 5, Episode 5, The Murder of Julie Doe, introducing the Trans Doe Network. This case involves murder, mystery, and suspense. The unidentifiable, the unreachable, the unknown. What happens when a community member disappears off the face of the earth? 1 minute, they are here, right before your eyes, laughing, smiling, crying, living. And then, without a warning, without any notice, you cannot contact them. You search, you seek, you plead for answers, and to never know? Only a selected few get those prayers answered, to learn the fate of their loved ones. And that is exactly what one family members and family is still doing now in this hateful homicide of Julie Doe, whose body was discovered on that Sunday, September 25th, 1988, just a few weeks after Labor Day. What happened to her? Who is she? Well, my audience, that is why the Trans Doe Network, an incredible nonprofit organization that raises awareness around the abductions and murders of our unidentifiable community members. But before we get into the hateful homicide of Julie Doe, let's learn a little bit about the city of Clermont, Florida.
By far, the #1 place that you guys asked me to give you an update on is Clermont and Wellness Way. So today's video, I'm going to take you around Clermont, downtown first, and then over to Wellness Way, show you some updates and some exciting things going on in the Clermont area. So the reason I love downtown Clermont is really for the opportunity that exists here. Now, it's not the same place that it was 2 years ago by far. You're gonna notice that they just redid all of this brickscape. It looks beautiful, but they have the lake and they've got so many other things that are going on here, from the National Training Center. So I think that when you think about downtown Mount Dora, you think downtown Winter Garden and Winter Park, Clermont is probably 3rd or 4th down the list of where people are hanging out, but I think that that's going to change as new places start to open up. Right behind me, we have the Galleria at Soma, and when you think about it, it looks like an art gallery, but then when you go inside, there's little businesses, and that's kind of what's taken up all of this downtown Clermont area, and I think it's a really exciting thing to see. So let me know down in the comments below, have you been to downtown Clermont, and what's maybe your favorite place to go while you're here? So one thing you'll notice about downtown Clermont is that you've got this amazing waterscape here that you don't have over at downtown Winter Garden. Now, I'm a big downtown Winter Garden fan. That's where our office is, and I'm a big believer what's going on there. But the reason I think that downtown Clermont has such a big upside is because you could walk over to the water. There's plenty of miles and miles of trails of walking, biking, hiking right around here. So when you think about different areas like Clermont, we don't really have something with waterfront that also has a thriving downtown with also a lot of new construction. And so I think Clermont's poised to boom. So let's go talk about the real estate space over in the Wellness Way, and I'll give you an update over there. So they're getting ready to redo the pier, and I think that that's going to make it even more usable of a space around the lake. And I think about like Winter Garden and what that was 10 years ago. I think Clermont is exactly like that. It's poised for massive growth. I'm excited to see what happens here. You've got some residential already in the area, right all around here, that really hasn't seen a lot of life. And so if you're an investor or you're a buyer looking to move into the area, it's still an affordable place if you're not looking new construction. Just 15 minutes from downtown Clermont is the new Wellness Way project. And on the way from here, we saw the new Tesla dealership going up. There's Costco going in here locally. There's a lot of cool things coming to Clermont that you wouldn't have thought just, again, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And so we're in the Wellness Way area. It's 16,000 acres, and there's already new builders coming here. Right now we're in Ridgeview, which is by Landsea Homes and Pulte Homes. Houses start here in the 400s. Well, let's talk a little bit more about what's coming to the Wellness Way and Olympus project area. All right, so let's talk about location. We are right off of 27, right across the street from Lake Louisa State Park. So you've got the lakes and the camping area. It's a beautiful nature area surrounding by everything else that's going on here. You've got rolling hills all throughout Clermont, which is kind of unique for Central Florida. Usually everything is super flat. And so they're putting houses all around the Olympus project. But what is the Olympus project? Clermont has been known for years for health and wellness. So we've got the National Training Center, you've got Olympians coming from all over the world just to train in Clermont. And so the city and the county got together and say, we're onto something. Let's create not just more houses, which there's gonna be a lot of them, but let's create a 240-acre development that's gonna lean into the idea of health and wellness. Phil Esposito from the Tampa Bay Lightning is gonna be doing a hockey center here. There's gonna be sports, entertainment, health, wellness, all types of stuff right behind us, something like Central Florida's never seen. That means we have high-paying jobs coming to Clermont to go around with the houses and offer a live, work, play environment like we haven't seen before. So with many of you guys asking about Wellness Way, what are the questions you have about what's going on here as things kind of continue to develop? Some of the other builders beyond Landsea and Pulte is going to be Lennar and David Weekley. David Weekley is one of my favorite builders, and to see them kind of coming here is going to create, I think, a little higher opportunity for people looking to move into the area. You also have Taylor Morrison, and there's some other builders coming. So you'll have a really good mix if real estate is your #1 place and a little bit more affordable than Horizon West and some of the other areas that are booming here in Central Florida, like maybe Lake Nona. All right, so this road, it was so wild because this never existed. They're putting in infrastructure to connect Clermont to everything. So Horizon West right now, to get to right where we're at in Clermont, it takes 30 minutes to kind of get back up and around to downtown Winter Garden, Horizon West, Disney. And so for the longest time, Clermont hasn't been like the place for people unless you were looking for just an affordable place to be. The reason I think this is going to blow up out here is all of the connector roads. They're going to be putting in 516, which is the new connector from 27 all the way to 429, which is going to open up everything and make your commute to this area go from a half hour to like 15 minutes to many places around Central Florida. So if you haven't been to downtown Clermont, this place is super cute. You've got the market over here, you've got the music shop, the dance place for your kids. There's just so much little things to do, and if you want to support local, this is a great way to do it. If you're thinking about buying a house here or in Wellness Way or really anywhere in Central Florida, my team and I, we'd love to be your real estate resource of choice. Email us info@positgroup.com. We'll see you guys on the next video.
Welcome back, my audience. As we witness, Clermont is a signature for its massive growth and its lovely legs from realtor Ken Pozak. As Detective Allison McKenzie arrives onto the scene, she discovers a beautiful young assumed cisgender woman in late stages of decomposition, but still recognizable. The morning after Julie was discovered, her body was taken for autopsy at the C.A. Pond Human Identification Laboratory in Gainesville, Florida, by William R. Maples. The cause of death was not apparent. Her hair was described as long and bleached to a strawberry blonde color. She had long manicured nails, which may have been artificial. Healed fractures were identified on her toes, one on her cheekbones, a rib, and even her nose. She was between 5'9" and 5'11", and weighed somewhere between 150 to 180 pounds. She had also undergone cosmetic surgeries. She had silicone breast implants, which would appear proportional to the victim's body. She had undergone cosmetic surgeries. She had silicone breast implants, which would appear proportional to the victim's body. The procedure may have been performed in Atlanta, Georgia, Miami, Florida, New Orleans, Louisiana, New York City, or California. It is assumed her gender-affirming surgery occurred circa 1984 based on the fact that the victim's implants were discontinued somewhere around 1983. She apparently had a rhinoplasty, which may have been related to the injury she sustained to her nose. It was initially thought she had given birth at least once. Based on this evidence, my audience, this was known as pivoting on the pelvis, which is attributed to due to hormonal changes as a result from hormone replacement therapy. Shortly after her body was discovered, Detective Allison McKenzie requested fingerprints to be taken in hopes to identify the victim. An initial sketch was created to depict an approximation of her appearance and life. After the discovery that Julie Doe was a transgender woman, the Sheriff's Department commissioned a new forensic sketch to be created from the skull. Retired detective and forensic artist Stephen Fusco enters the scene and creates this image. This image is now widely circulated, as you'll see throughout today's episode. There's also a time that she had ultimately received the nickname Julie, based from the LGBTQ-themed movie To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar. So in 2018, osteotopic tests were performed in Tampa, Florida by the University of South Florida on samples from the decedent's skull to pinpoint potential locations where she resided. The results suggested the victim originated from southern Florida. A sergeant working on the case voiced the possibility that the victim underwent challenges related to being a trans woman during the 1980s. Remember, this is during the HIV and AIDS pandemic. A lot of discrimination towards our communities. It could have been family estrangement. She could have been disowned, right, my audience? All of these things could have played a role in her status becoming unidentified, as there was no missing reports filed around that time that matched her description. And so that's why the DNA Doe Project, which specializes in identifying potential family members of unknown individuals through genetic genealogy, exists. 2 attempts funded by investigative agencies to exact enough DNA from the bones proved to be unsuccessful. The organization later began fundraising for a 3rd attempt in November of 2018, which also failed to generate a usable file. So in January 2020, a suitable sample was officially successful, obtained for genealogical research. After a 4th lab was consulted, DNA Doe Project volunteers Lee and Anthony Redgraves founded the Trans Doe Task Force, also known as Trans Doe Network, to advocate for unidentified victims who were assigned trans or gender nonconforming. The pair voiced concern that genetic genealogy research may reveal a decedent's birth and or legal name, but may not provide the title of the individual's preferred during life. One of the task force goals is to research and also provide identification on how, this community, far too often we have been dead named. I want to take a moment, my audience, to share with you all other investigative journalists and podcasters who have their own insight into the hateful homicide of 27-year-old white transgender female Julie Doe, whose body was discovered alongside a ditch in Clermont, Florida on that Sunday, September 25th, 1988.
Back in 1988, Julie's case was circulated. A forensic sketch was made and placed in all the local papers. They shared Julie's story, but no one ever came forward with an identity. And it wasn't long until the case just went cold and got put on the back burner. Investigators did speak with the nearest neighbour, but this area was so rural that he lived about a mile away from where Julie was found, and he didn't see or hear anything suspicious in the weeks before her death, or at least until her body was found. They also spoke with people at nearby businesses and bars, but again, this was a dead end. Local-ish residents did offer a number of potential leads as to who this woman could have been, but each time they were able to track the woman down and confirm that she was still alive, finding them safe and sound. It's always been suspected that Julie was murdered. This was a homicide. As I said earlier, she didn't place her own body in the weeds. But it has also been speculated that she may have been ditched after maybe overdosing on drugs and somebody just panicked and ditched her body. The level of decomposition when she was found meant that drug testing just couldn't be done. But then, 22 years later, in 2010, Florida was able to close 2 other old Doe cases on their books through DNA. Not genetic genealogy that wouldn't really rear its head for another few years, but through DNA testing. That very same year, Detective Tamara Dale took over the Lake County Sheriff's Office, and she made a push to solve cold cases, not just there, but statewide. The state as a whole got a whole load of funding to focus on these old cases, and in 2015, Julie's body was taken out of storage for DNA testing. She'd been kept at the lab since 1988 in an evidence room with a number of other unidentified people. By this point, Maples had passed almost 2 decades beforehand, so the person who took over the case was his mentee, Dr. Michael Warren, the current director of CAFIL. And when Warren looked over the remains, he noticed some anomalies, some things that didn't quite match up with Maples' analysis. But not really due to any fault of his own, Maples made his analysis simply based on the medical knowledge of the time, and a lot of things have changed since 1988. Warren noted the pits on the pelvis, which were previously speculated to be caused by a hormone that softens bones for childbirth. But this theory was discredited after women who had not given birth were found with them, and then it was found that men could secrete this hormone as well. In Julie's case, she would have been taking high amounts of estrogen. Warren said, at the time, literature was starting to come out indicating these markings aren't a good indicator of childbirth or that a person is a female. Maples was a victim of the science at the time. All the reports called the person a female. If you're getting all the information, it can influence you. Plus, the person was wearing women's attire and had breast implants. The transgender community was much smaller back then, so it wasn't something you'd expect. I do want to stress here that Julie Doe was a woman. You can't deny that. Looking at the entire body, she identified as a woman. She lived her life as a woman. However, when it comes to biologically, she was biologically male, and that is really important when it comes to identification. You have to know the full story.
Welcome back, my audience. That was from creator Georgia Marie. Now let's witness another take.
The medical examiner described the victim as a Caucasian female between the ages of 22 and 35 who was at least 5 feet 10 inches tall. She was physically fit and had a trim, athletic figure at the time of her death, suggesting she may have been an athlete. There were no recent symptoms of major physical trauma on the woman's body, but there were no internal or visible signs of trauma either. Thus, a cause of death could never be confirmed. After some time, the breaks in Julie Doe's ribs, nose, cheekbones, and toe all healed. The fracture in the cheekbone was most obviously caused by blunt force trauma. There is no way to determine if all of these wounds occurred at once or on separate occasions. Although there is a plethora of contradictory data, a 250cc implant is a safe and common choice, and a 200cc implant is roughly equivalent to a 1-cup size increase. Because of the lot number on her breast implant, investigators were able to narrow down the possible year of her surgery to 1984. Unfortunately, it wasn't until the 1990s that all implants were given serial numbers, so that wouldn't give them any clues as to who she was. A Jane Doe who had breast implants today can be identified by serial number, but in 1988, this wasn't possible. One of the most intriguing findings from the initial autopsy concerned the victim's pelvis. He claimed that she had already given birth once. Her pelvis showed signs of parturition, which were commonly linked with natural childbirth at the time. These depressions can happen during a vaginal birth if the ligaments are torn, or if the ligaments are loosened too much. Studies have shown that women who have given birth are statistically more likely to have these pits, and that the depth of the pits increases with the number of children a woman has. In contrast, no one who has given birth in any of the trials has shown any evidence of a parturition scar. Most osteologists have drawn the conclusion that this pitting is more indicative of female puberty and hormones than of natural birth. The first inquiry into Julie Doe's death relied solely on the results of this autopsy, as no other information or evidence was available at the time. The case of Jane Doe swiftly grew cold due to the lack of leads. This was in part due to a lack of information and leads, but in 2015 the police department realized that they had overlooked a crucial portion of the case during their initial investigation. One of the most intriguing and crucial features of this case is the time frame of Julie's change. The fact that she was able to get so much done suggests that she was well off enough to afford several surgeries, and that she had friends and family to assist her recovery and locate specialists willing to treat her. These are extremely unusual occurrences given the time period in which Julie was born and raised. Julie would have needed to be on hormone replacement medication for a long time prior to her death for the initial medical examiner to have mistaken her bone structure for that of a biological female. She would have needed to be on hormones for at least 2 years prior to getting breast implants as a trans woman. Since the cutoff year for this particular brand of breast implants was 1984, it's safe to assume that she passed away at least 6 years after passing as a woman. She may have been as young as 16 when this process began, according to the lowest age estimate. Her pelvic pitting was so obvious, and her skeleton did not resemble that of a man going through puberty because she started HRT at such a young age. Given this, it's likely that she began taking hormones before she was in her mid-20s. The DNA Doe Project announced in 2018 that they would try to trace Julie Doe's genetic ancestry. Donate's testing and research fund was fully financed in just 2 days, making it one of the shortest DDP campaigns to date. Things didn't continue to go swimmingly from there. It took 3 tries to get a good enough DNA profile from Julie Doe's bones to use in genetic genealogy. All along, there was concern that the DDP might give up, or that the technique, which has been so effective in other situations, would fail to help Julie. Finally, her DNA was taken and submitted to GEDmatch. Julie Doe's DNA revealed that she has ancestors from the southeast of the United States.
Welcome back again, my audience, and that was from the amazing YouTube channel Cold Case. And as we continue to go through this case, Detective Allison McKenzie reaches out to the surrounding neighbors and businesses to see if there had been a witness to anyone fitting Julie Doe's description. A gentleman by the name of Zeke Roosevelt did recall seeing a beautiful young woman of average height entering a bar and leaving with a suspicious-looking white male who was very flirty. He recalled her because he admitted to wanting to ask her out, but didn't get the chance to. That woman could have been Julie. And unfortunately, he never saw her again as she went off into that spring night on that Saturday, April 16th of 1988. Detective Allison McKenzie interviewed others at the bar, and some recall the young beauty dancing with a cowboy and disappearing into the night. Julie Doe is still unidentified to this day, but her gender identity was revealed due to the DNA Doe Project. Let's learn more about the DNA Doe Project from co-founder Margaret Press.
Hello everyone, our CrimeCon 2022 coverage continues. I'm Stephanie Gomolka and I'm joined by Margaret Press from the DNA Doe Project. Tell me about, so you're the co-founder.
Yes, that's right.
Tell me about the founding and how you got started.
Well, back in 2017, I'd never even thought about John Does or missing persons. It wasn't on my radar. I was a full-time programmer and a mystery writer on the side, and I was reading one of my favorite mystery writers, Sue Grafton. Read her book, Q is for Quarry, that she said was based on a Jane Doe out of Lompoc, California, a true story, although hers was fictionalized. And it occurred to me, because she was reaching out to her public saying she wants to solve this case.
Yeah.
The woman had never been identified, and it just clicked on, in my mind, why can't we use genetic genealogy to solve Does? So I started contacting people, reached out, found Colleen, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So I want to know about, what led you to the genetic genealogy of it all, because I saw you, so you studied linguistics, is that right?
Right.
Tell me about what you studied, how, you even knew about genetic genealogy and where you made that jump.
So I'd been doing genealogy back when I was a teenager at my grandmother's knee, back when it was all just paper stuff. And then in 2006, I read an article, I think in the New York Times, that was about people using genetic genealogy to find cousins. And again, it sort of clicked. It never occurred to me that DNA was available for consumers like us. And so that was a sea change for me. I started doing mitochondrial and Y-DNA for friends and relatives, and then in 2012 or so, we were starting to see the nuclear DNA kits, which are so much more powerful.
Yeah, yeah. And so how many people have you been able to identify?
We've identified over 75. in our group, and we're working on probably 60 more. Some of our tough cases take a long time. Others we solve in a couple of hours.
Yeah. Tell me about the process and how your team works. I saw we were talking about this just now. You're bi-coastal. How does it work?
Right. So we put together small teams. That's our model. We're very unusual that way. We have a couple of team leaders and a couple of others, depending upon how many matches there are for the doe. And so the lab process is pretty complicated because we may have, the agency may only have bones or hair or teeth. It can be very old cases, very compromised DNA. So we go through labs for extraction and then sequencing, and if we don't get enough, it goes back to find another bone or another tooth, and it goes over and over again. And we often fund those extra efforts because agencies just don't have the money. So we raise funds from our donors to cover these costs. When we finally get the DNA, we upload it into, so that when we get the DNA, it comes out as a data file.
Right.
It's not liquid DNA when it gets to us. We upload that file just like anybody else who's taken like an ancestry test or MyHeritage or 23andMe. You can download a data file yourself if you've taken a test like that and upload it to these third-party databases like GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. And so we use those to find people who share DNA with our doe. We build out their family trees so we can find the missing spot in their tree, and that's our doe.
Is there, if someone has a missing loved one and they don't know where they are,
yes,
is there a process that you would recommend for maybe adding them to a GEDmatch or a different platform?
Yes, there's a number of steps they can take so that they feel they're doing something. And we have a whole page on our website. If you go to DNADoeProject.org, we have a link right on the front that says Families of the Missing, because we can't help with missing people. We're at the other end when they're found. But there's been misleading information occasionally online that people are asked to do certain things that don't really help. So go to our page. You want to report them. Make sure there's a report in NamUs, which is the federally run database of missing persons and unidentified remains. Follow up, make sure that report doesn't get purged. Take an ancestry test yourself with any of the companies and upload to GEDmatch. So there's a lot of steps they can do that will help. But the only place we can find them is if they're in GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA. So if we've got their body, sorry to put it so bluntly, but they need to be in the databases that we're looking in, not in other databases.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No, important information to add there. So this is not your first time at CrimeCon, correct? Or
This
it
is our first
time
at CrimeCon, right? We've never thought of this as one of our potential audiences, but I think the worlds are coming closer and closer together. So we've been at a lot of conferences that are about from law enforcement or genealogists, but never true crime fans. And true crime fans are really, they're passionate about our mission as well. And I think those worlds are now colliding, because since the Golden State Killer case made this such an obvious tool, a new tool, and people are becoming aware of it, they want to help. They want to help. So we welcome that help. So we love CrimeCon.
Welcome back, my audience. That was a little information about one of the benefactors of the Trans Doe Network, the DNA Doe Project. As we prepare to conclude, I want to take a moment to learn about the work that the Trans Doe Network does from its incredible team members. Please note, this will be a longer clip due to its pertinent information. Thank you again.
This past June, I went to the Portsmouth Pride up in New Hampshire. When I was walking through the displays, I came across the display that said the Trans Doe Task Force. And instantly, when I saw the word doe, I knew that there was something serious that you all were doing, and I came up to talk to you. And what I've learned and what I'm looking forward to learning is exactly what the Trans Doe Task Force is doing to help the trans community, and what are some of the stories that you have to share with us. So if you all would like to introduce yourselves to the cameras and to the world.
So I'll start. My name's Amy Michael. I'm a anthropology professor at the University of New Hampshire. I'm a later addition to the Trans Doe Task Force. So I contacted Lee and Anthony, I think maybe in March of this year, around there, because I am particularly particularly interested in my own research focuses on using forensic anthropology and biological anthropology to solve cold cases. And so just in like doing some Googling, I'd heard of the DNA Doe Project, and I found what they were doing because they've got a great social media presence. And I wrote to them, and Lee wrote me back like the next day, and I was very excited.
Okay, so just what is a cold case, just in case people don't know what that is?
So a cold case, the time varies, but it's a case that all the leads have basically been exhausted through traditional investigative means. And so law enforcement might turn to not necessarily alternative methods, but maybe some methods that aren't used in every case. My experience with cold cases has been in Michigan and in Idaho before New Hampshire. I was working at universities there. So I encountered cold cases that ranged from like, you know, a couple years old, and they just had like, law enforcement just had no idea who the decedent was or who the victim was. All the way, I think that my most recent case that I was working on was a 1981 cold case in recovery, where they knew who the individual was, or they had an inkling of who the victim was, but no suspects. And so those cases appeal to me because I like to use forensic anthropology and skeletal biology to help law enforcement solve them. But you know, there's this social justice issue and aspect to it too, and that's where Lee and Anthony, I think, are doing like this amazing like cutting edge work, and I knew that I really wanted to be a part of that work with them.
I'm Lee Bingham Redgrave, and I work as a forensic genealogist with the DNA Doe Project, and I've been doing that for about a year and a half, a little more than a year and a half. And 6 months into working that project, it occurred to me that we were working on Jane Does and John Does, but what if there was a trans Doe somewhere that maybe people weren't paying close attention to how they were being classified, and maybe that was preventing their identification. So I started thinking, and Anthony and I started doing research to try to find a case like this, and we found one right away and talked with the people at the DNA Doe Project about whether or not we could find a way to take this case on. And then we kept finding more cases and quickly discovered that we would need to kind of form a side project, which is what the Trans Doe Task Force is a satellite to the DNA Doe Project. It's not officially linked. The DNA Doe Project is a 501c3, and the Trans Doe Task Force is just a grassroots collaborative effort. So we find the cases, and we do the research behind the cases and bundle it up and send it to the DNA Doe Project, and then they'll contact the law enforcement department to see if they can take the case.
Wow. For me, as a transgender woman, I understand the fear that a lot of my community has of harm happening. And this is going to be an intense conversation that we're going to have, because we're going to be talking about harm that has happened to one another and happened to other people. And so Anthony, you're like one of the brainchilds of the project too. If you'd like to kind of explain your role in.
My name is Anthony Redgrave. I am also a forensic genealogist with the DNA Doe Project, and I'm a current doctoral student of transformative leadership and education. My doctoral work is going to be in developing training courses for law enforcement that have to do with doing forensic genealogy so that they can do it in-house and don't have to hire out to other people, so they can have more control over the process themselves and reduce the chain of custody on evidence and be able to control contacting people if they need to and not have to do a lot of back and forth and save money. There was a gap in understanding in human anthropology of how a trans or intersex decedent might look long after they've died, and like identifying somebody from skeletal remains. There's such a wide, I've learned from Amy, there's a large range of ways that humans can present, and what does hormone treatment do to that? What does surgery do to that? Like how does that look if a person is unidentified and found long after they're recognizable? There's a problem with the classification system because it's not black and white, and it's not black and white even for cisgender people. And so thinking about that and thinking about how the language that's used in science and medicine and the language that's used socially very frequently don't meet up, because science thinks things are black and white when they're not, and we're still catching up on that. And people think things are black and white in ways that they aren't. And So it became important to recognize that there's such a push for, there's such interest in cold case and true crime right now that it's the time to talk about this problem. When we started the Trans Doe Task Force and we started looking into cases where there were people who were deceased and might have been trans or intersex or cross-dressing or anything, we found that the way that they're classified inside of legal systems might not reflect the way that they were in life, might not reflect the way that they were identified by their loved ones when they were reported missing, so they might not have been compared in the system in the first place. And what does that mean when they are identified? What does that mean for identifying them to family or their chosen family? Like, how is that going to be different, and how is that going to be approached from a respectful place? Who's going to do that? My role is a lot of developing public education, developing public outreach, and also hopefully being able to suggest ways to fix the problem and then teaching people how to do it.
Are there numbers, like how many cold cases, let's say, do you think that you've hit upon just for transgender people?
I have a recent estimate on cold cases in general, but an estimate on trans cold cases is maybe harder to come by because of reporting.
Okay.
And you can maybe confirm this, that the number that I heard recently is about 2,000 cases of unidentified remains go unsolved. Is that per year? Is that per year? 2,000 per year?
That sounds about right, and then we have the competing issue of individuals who have never been found. Right, so you have the missing, you have the unidentified, then you have the unclaimed. And so in the States here, we have an organization called NAMUS, and a lot of the case research is gleaning information from NAMUS, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Lee and Anthony are doing something that I feel is like critically important, and all the volunteers that work with the Trans Doe Task Force too, which is going through and identifying those cases, mining places or mining sites like NAMUS, mining like Trans Day remembrance lists, things like this, because, and sometimes that, and you guys can speak better to this, but sometimes it's just like one little detail that might kick this into, like, maybe this is a trans or gender variant person that we're looking at, and you know, police in 1985 were not thinking that. It is maddening to think like we don't have real numbers to report, because I feel like if we did have you know, solid numbers, sometimes research dollars come along with that, sometimes grants come along with that, right? But Lee is right. I mean, all we can really know is a general ballpark number of cold cases, but that doesn't count people who never get found and who sometimes never even get reported missing. Right, we're talking about sometimes, in all cold cases, sometimes really vulnerable people and populations. And so, like, hard numbers are difficult to come by. Further complicating that issue is finding individual cases that might have been people living as transgender or gender variant during life.
So I'd like to kind of hear a story of one of your cases.
So it was a case, the first case that we found was the case of Julie Doe out of Florida. One of my friends had sent me a link to an article about a detective in Florida who had taken, it was a new cold case detective, had taken on this case from a detective who had retired and was trying to reinvigorate the case by doing DNA testing, and this was in 2014. So it was an article that was a few years old that she had sent me. And so the article explained that it was a person who had been originally identified as a Jane Doe, originally identified and stayed that way from, was it 1988 to 2014. Nobody had any idea that she was transgender. They just thought that she was a cisgender female with a robust build, was how they had phrased it. And there were various studies done by some top anthropologists that didn't find anything out of the ordinary other than this is a deceased female and we don't know who she is. So in 2014, they did DNA testing and came back with a karyotype of XY. And they went, oh, we better take another look at these remains. And they pulled out her remains, and with new, you know, more advanced learning, took another look and went, wow, we've made a mistake here. You know, what if somebody had reported a missing son and you know, this was this person, and those two stories would never have connected in the system. Because if somebody was reported as male and missing, and then this was a Jane Doe, they don't compare across categories whatsoever. So if her family had reported her missing before her transition, this is a story of somebody who has taught a lot of people a lot of things.
It speaks to cognitive bias in our field of forensic anthropology too. Mike Warren, who I think is the anthropologist that worked on that in Florida, he presented on Julie Doe 2 presentations at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences a few years ago. And one of his entire presentations was about this, like, this is a cognitive bias problem. If you're looking for a male individual, you're going to find a male skeleton. And so I think that what Lee summarized just now is that, and what Anthony alluded to earlier, is that the human skeleton, I mean, we're working on all humans are variable, right? Including your pelvis, which is the site of sex estimation. And so what we find as anthropologists is that, yeah, there are like some slam dunk, this looks very biologically male and very biologically female, but the majority of us fall in a spectrum.
Welcome back, my audience, and to our beautiful Julie Doe, born circa 1960 and resting on since September 25th of 1988. We remember you yesterday, today, tomorrow, forever and always. Thank you so much, my audience, for tuning in to Season 5, Episode 5, The Murder of Julie Doe, introducing the Trans Doe Network. And a huge thank you to community member Devin Cole, an incredible white non-binary community member from Florida, for sharing this story. Thank you again, my audience. Stay tuned for Season 5, Episode 6, The Murder of Stacey Blahnik. This is for you, mama. Coming soon on Spotify, Apple, iHeart, Radio, Amazon, and wherever else you listen. Please also follow us on Instagram, TikTok, X, YouTube, Facebook, at A Hateful Homicide, and you can follow me at MalloryJenna90. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the new year. Bye-bye.